Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to salute Minister Teresa Cantelo, Minister Neri, Romulo, my colleagues here, and ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the opportunity of participating in this seminar, which is extremely interesting at this moment of balance, of important, significant advances, and a moment of thinking about the future too. I hope that I can fulfill your expectations, Romulo. Based on your questions, I will cover the subject. So the main question is, what are the public policies that will be able to address the needs of this large segment of the population who has overcome extreme poverty in Brazil, and how do we think about sustainable poverty reduction and also tackling inequalities? What about labor? Will it have role in these policies? Of course, I come from ILO, so certainly I believe that labor has a role to play in this agenda. More than that, it needs to be part of the foundations of this agenda. So I will talk about why and how can labor be included in this agenda. To start with, I'd like to say that Thiago's going to help us. So I will start by saying that labor is one of the main links between socio-economic development, one of the main mechanisms through which the benefits of development can effectively reach populations, people, and how it can be better distributed. I will address some evidences. Thiago, please. This data comes from PNAD 2012. PNAD is the household survey, sampling survey. So this is the weight of labor and the composition of household income. The first column is Brazil. Okay, and then other regions, the regions of the country. So according to PNAD 2012, the income coming from labor corresponded to 77% of households' incomes, i.e. more than 2/3 of household incomes. If there is no labor income, this leads us to major problems for families. We also see that 17.9% of this income comes from retirement pensions and 5.1% comes from other incomes, including Bolsa Família and cash transfer programs. So this is for the whole of Brazil. If we address the share of labor incomes in poor families, and by poor we mean 1/4 of the minimum wage, we can see that even in these families, labor incomes account for at least 60% of the household income. Of course, the weight of other incomes are greater, and the weight of retirement and pensions will be reduced, which may be seen as an indicator of informality, precarious situation, and lack of social security, social protection undergone by the poorer populations and their work. If I said that work is the main way for people to enjoy the fruit or the gains of the economic development, on the other hand, we see that it is not any type of work that will lead to this effect. If we do not consider people who are unemployed or at the margin of the labor market, we see a high percentage of workers that are occupied, that have work, but they remain poor or extremely poor, precisely because they have precarious or labor precarious work. ILO data says that 375 million workers in the world today are extremely poor, using the $1.25 a day line. So, almost 40% of them are workers. They work. They're occupied labor. This corresponds to 11% of the total people working in the world. If poverty line goes to less than $2, then we're talking about 839 million workers are poor, corresponding to 24 and 27% of the population working, of the working population. So, working conditions represent the conditions of poor and of poverty and extreme poverty. So, labor can be the key to show these inequalities, as well as the key for us to move forward. That's why it is essential, on my perspective, that the future agenda for sustainable eradication of extreme poverty and inequality should have in its core the promotion not only of employment but of decent work. This is the concept of ILO. Meaning what? For work to have this role, it has to have some certain conditions. It needs to comply with certain conditions. So the concept of decent work, which was formalized by ILO in '89 and was undertaken by the UN, it goes beyond a more traditional view of quality work. It is multidimensional. It has a dimension that is quantitative, generating opportunities in sufficient numbers for people to be included in society and survive through their work, but also it has a qualitative dimension of working hours, working conditions, contracts, social security, rights, and voice and representation. We're talking about players in the work world that participate in the definition or establishment of these conditions. We have four main objectives: generating better and more and better jobs, social protection, social dialogue, and labor rights. The notion of decent work has a correlation, which is unacceptable work or work that should be abolished, i.e., the total opposite. And these forms of work, unacceptable, child labor, forced labor, in degrading conditions, threatening the health of workers, all these are unacceptable. They also reproduce poverty and inequality. This slide gives us an idea about the indicators. We are quite advanced in this journey of measurement, monitoring, and we discussed in ILO whether or not we should have decent work indicator or synthetic or summarized indicator, but that was discarded, the idea. But this concept involves 10 dimensions. They are listed here. Access to employment, income, working hours, stability, security, equality, safe work, social security, and social dialogue and representation. The idea of overcoming poverty is present in today's agenda in Brazil. Many people have already said that. And if we explain the results as regards the eradication of poverty and inequality, I believe this is a clear option or choice combining social and labor policies. The importance of factors that go beyond cash transfers. I'd like to mention two. Unemployment. This is just a curve. 23 to 2013, the reduction of unemployment. We are at 4.7%. It is a significant reduction. And also, second, I'd like to speak about informality or the formalization of job posts, of employment. This shows us the evolution of formalization or between 2004 and 2013 in Brazil, going from 46.7 to 659. No, I beg your pardon. The total is, yes, that 59%, involving several policies, labor inspection, leading to greater formalization or registered works, both for wage and self-employed workers. It is a very powerful tool. This is significant progress, which is also linked to the eradication of poverty, because formal work normally is better paid with access to rights and social security. However, if we have this progress to celebrate, we can also see the challenges. Among them, the fact that we have 60% of our labor market is formalized, meaning that 40 is informal. This means 37 million people in Brazil who work in an informal manner, not registered. And we don't have that much difference or gap between men and women. However, we have a very large gap between the black and the white population. So formalization of work, of labor, is extremely important. Paying attention to inequality in terms of race and territory. There are levels that are different. If we look at states and municipalities, the rates of formality or informality are very high. They're all different. The inequality is very high. And in Santa Catarina, we see a formalization rate of 74%, and in Maranhão, 29%. So there's one other sector I'd like to address, domestic work, that has a lot to do with several other issues related to social well-being and rates of informality are still very high in this sector, domestic work. And it is very persistent. Unfortunately, it does not follow the general trend of formalization in the market, in the labor market. And we're talking about millions of people, most of them women, corresponding to almost 16% of the occupation among women. So if you want to talk about eradication of poverty and equality in Brazil, we need to address this sector. In some states of the federation, the rate of formalization is 10%, i.e. 90% informality. So this is not just economic. The reasons why this is the context are much more complex. So in terms of territory, despite the large differences of levels of formality, the good news is that in this recent trend of formalization, it has been much more marked in the regions of the country where the labor market is less structured. So in total, we had 65% for the country, in the north 102, and in the northeast 77%, showing also another side of this policy to reduce the inequalities in the country. Minimum wage. I just wanted to reiterate, when I say that the results of policies, the outcomes, are according to this mix of policies, this is a very clear example. We worked together, Bolsa Família and minimum wage. We needed to negotiate with unions, we legislated, and it was maintained during the crisis as part of anti-cyclic policies, the same way of social protection. And this has a major effect in poverty reduction and inequality reduction. This has been analyzed by IPEA and MDS, the Ministry of Social Development. This is the progress of the actual average income of people aged 16 or less. These are totals, men and women, black and white, and white women. We can see in all cases the actual average income is lower. The women's incomes are lower than men's. And all these other differences. We see a difference. We can see all the numbers in these columns, and we can see a reduction in inequalities, and that's where the weight of the minimum wage is huge, because we see the people in the base of the wage pyramid, and I see that formalization and minimum wages are massively important for the policies. I wanted to talk about the youth, but I don't have time. There's been a rebellion, a consented rebellion. Please talk about the youth. 1 minute. 1 minute on youth and 1 minute on child labor, okay? Okay. One discussion that is very mais precisamente, a gente deveria dizer jovens que não estudam e não estão ocupados no mercado. Okay. We are discussing very much youth that are not at school and who do not work either. So these are the curves, and we're talking about people aged 15 to 24. And Here, the gender cohort is central. As regards informality, we have a problem, a greater problem in race, but here we're talking about gender. We're talking a huge difference, and if we aggregate the racial dimension, then it is even worsened. This shows that indicators on youth have improved recently, and we have worked with IPEA in this area, showing improvements in several areas, but this is still a major problem. We do need to qualify this double inactivity. If we get gender and race, there are huge differences. And how do we need to qualify this? Some situations are permanent and some are temporary. And we, in the work we carried out with IPEA, we looked at a time period of 4 months. So there is a lot of instability. However, we do have some other areas that are very structural, especially related to ladies, to women, to girls who are not at school, neither working, because they need to be at home looking after their younger brothers and sisters so that their mothers can go out and work. Here we're talking about childcare, urban mobility, and all these problems that affect women much more than men. Lastly, child labor. Brazil is also a very important example in this area. This is the curve from 92 to 2013. We went from 8.5 million of children and adolescents in the labor market to 3.2 million. This means over 62% reduction in absolute numbers. We held a very large conference on child labor last year, and in certain cases, this is divided by age brackets: 5 to 9, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And between 2004 and 2013, we can see there is a reduction in all cases. And 5 to 9 age bracket, child labor is practically eradicated in Brazil. And the vast majority is here in the middle, 14, 15, 16, 17. Child labor is forbidden until 14 years of age. As of 14 years of age until 16, they can be apprentices. And why am I saying that? Because child labor is a major vector. So the same way as formality is a vector of poverty production. One of the myths is this one, that children go to work and they'll be then prepared for the labor market. Of course not. They have, it is quite the opposite. Over 80% are aged 14 plus. Data also indicates that many of these children and adolescents are in families who overcame poverty and extreme poverty. Therefore, how can we advance definitely in the eradication of child labor in Brazil? One part that we're doing, something that we are doing is concentrating on the PET, on the program against child labor, but also we need to focus on other policies of education and labor market that may address these youth. So I just would like to conclude by saying that if we think about the future, it is essential that we integrate and that we have scale. That was very clear when the minister spoke to us. We need scale here in Brazil. It's a large country, and that's what we're talking about, 37 million in informal jobs. So policies need to address regional inequalities as well, and the tools to measure, such as indicators, municipal indicators of decent work that we're working together with MDS and IBGE, they can be able to characterize where are the segments where we need further work in a more combined manner. Of course, we do have a macro challenge, which is to maintain growth and employment generation and formalization, but I believe that inclusion, productive inclusion through decent work is key. This is the difference between Brasil São Miséria and Bolsa Família. Through all the dimensions that have been mentioned here yesterday, microcredit, Pronatec, cisterns, electricity for all this. This is in the agenda, but this needs to be reinforced together with the concern of productive inclusion through or by means of decent work that will actually remove people from poverty. And in this sense, I believe that one of the aspects that should actually be further worked at is intermediation. The public system of employment, work, and income can be connected to all these other topics. Lastly, the improvement of indicators. We have a very well-developed statistics system, and all these tools can be very useful for us to be able to improve policies with practical and concrete knowledge of reality. Thank you, and I apologize for being late.